And it's Prince Andrew is giving up all of his royal titles and honours, including the Duke of York. You've all seen all the clips by him. We know he doesn't sweat. We know he enjoys Pizza Express. So let's get straight in with the panel.
The morning air hung heavy over Buckingham Palace as camera flashes erupted like lightning against the grey October sky. Journalists rushed through the gates, their faces tense with anticipation. Inside broadcasting studios across London, morning television hosts froze mid-sentence, pressing fingers to their earpieces as urgent notes arrived from producers. The crawl at the bottom of every major news channel began flashing the same words. Breaking, Kensington Palace to make urgent statement. Something unthinkable was about to happen. For years, the monarchy had maintained its protective wall around one of its most controversial members. Through scandals, lawsuits, and public outcry, the institution had held firm, offering vague statements, strategic silences, and the weight of centuries-old tradition as its defense. But on this cold morning, that wall was about to crack. Prince William, heir to the throne and future King of England, was preparing to confirm what millions had suspected, but few believed would ever be spoken aloud. Prince Andrew's time within the royal family was over. Archive footage began rolling across screens worldwide. The infamous 2019 BBC interview. Andrew's face calm yet defensive as he spoke words that would become his legacy. "We were friends." His voice echoed through time, a haunting reminder of poor judgment and moral blindness. The cameras cut between his composed demeanor then and the chaos outside the palace gates now. Reporters shouting questions into the void, awaiting confirmation of the unconfirmable. This was not merely a family dispute or an internal reshuffling of duties. This was history in motion, a moment when the heir to the British throne would publicly disown his uncle, severing ties not just between two men, but between the monarchy and its own past. For the first time in generations, the crown would choose accountability over loyalty, transparency over tradition. A sense of inevitability hung in the air. The reckoning had been years in the making, building like a storm on the horizon. Now, as the world watched, the thunder would finally break. The morning of October 16th, 2025, arrived cold and unforgiving. Outside the gates of Kensington Palace, a crowd had gathered, journalists clutching microphones, cameras mounted on tripods, royal watchers wrapped in scarves against the autumn chill. Their breath formed small clouds in the air as they murmured amongst themselves, speculations swirling like the wind through the trees. Inside, preparations had been underway since dawn. Aides moved silently through corridors, their footsteps muffled by centuries-old carpets. Phones rang constantly, calls from Buckingham Palace, from Windsor, from Parliament. Everyone knew what was coming, yet no one could quite believe it would actually happen. At precisely 10 a.m., the palace's official social media accounts went silent. Then, moments later, a single statement appeared. The Prince of Wales will address the nation at 11 a.m. regarding matters of royal duty and institutional integrity. When William finally stepped forward, the weight of generations rested on his shoulders. His face was stoic, composed, but those who knew him well could see the burden in his eyes, the heaviness of a decision no one in his position should have to make. He wore a dark suit, no military decorations, no royal regalia. This was not a ceremonial moment. This was something far more serious. His words were measured, deliberate, each sentence carrying the weight of constitutional significance. The crown exists not for the comfort of those who bear it, but in service to the people who entrust us with their faith. That service demands integrity, accountability, and an unwavering commitment to the moral foundation upon which this institution rests. He paused, the silence stretching across television screens and smartphone feeds worldwide. Then came the words that would define his early reign. "It is with great sadness but absolute conviction that I confirm Prince Andrew will no longer hold any association with the working royal family, effective immediately." This decision reflects not just recent revelations, but a fundamental breach of the values we are sworn to uphold. The shockwave was instant. Inside Parliament, MPs exchanged glances of disbelief. Royal correspondents scrambled to analyze the historical significance, comparing it to Edward VIII's abdication, to Princess Diana's expulsion from the family circle. Social media exploded with reactions, some praising William's courage, others mourning the fracture of a family before the world's eyes. Even royalists, traditionally protective of the institution's privacy, admitted the announcement felt both devastating and inevitable. As William concluded and stepped away from the podium, one phrase echoed through the halls of history. It was not just a statement about one man's fall, but about the monarchy's survival. To understand how this moment arrived, we must step back through years of mounting tension, whispered conversations in palace corridors, and increasingly awkward silences at family gatherings. The cracks had been forming long before they became visible to the world. After Queen Elizabeth II's death in September 2022, everything shifted. She had been the ultimate protector, the matriarch whose word was final, whose preference for discretion and family loyalty superseded almost everything else. Andrew was her son, her favorite by many accounts, and under her watch, he remained insulated despite mounting scandals. But with her passing, that protective shield vanished. The monarchy found itself divided between two camps: the traditionalists, those who believed in absolute family loyalty, who argued that royal blood meant protecting one's own regardless of external pressures, rallied around Andrew. They saw public exile as capitulation to media hysteria, a dangerous precedent that undermined royal sovereignty. But opposing them stood the modernizers, led quietly but firmly by Prince William and Princess Anne. Their logic was different. The crown survived not through isolation, but through public trust. In an age of transparency and accountability, moral blindness was no longer sustainable. To them, protecting Andrew meant sacrificing the institution itself. King Charles III found himself caught between these forces, torn between brotherly love and royal duty. Reports emerged of late-night phone calls, of Charles pacing the gardens at Clarence House, weighing impossible choices. He delayed, hoping somehow the storm would pass, that time would heal the wounds, but time only deepened them. By 2024, the breaking point had arrived. Public opinion polls showed trust in the monarchy plummeting to historic lows. Old scandals resurfaced in newspapers with renewed vigor. Protests appeared outside Windsor Castle, demonstrators holding signs demanding Andrew's complete removal from royal life. The message was clear. The public's patience had expired. Behind palace walls, something else was brewing, something buried deep within royal archives, hidden in password-protected files and forgotten email servers. A truth that, once revealed, would reopen every wound the monarchy had tried to seal. It was an old email, just one message dated years before, but it would change everything. In February 2011, a brief email was sent from an account linked to Prince Andrew. The message was short, barely 3 sentences, but its contents were incendiary. "We are in this together, and let's play some more soon." For over a decade, this communication remained hidden, lost in the vast digital archives of palace correspondence. But in early 2025, as part of William's transparency initiative to modernize royal record-keeping, a forensic digital audit uncovered it. The metadata was authenticated, the server traced back to official palace networks, the timestamp verified. There was no question of its authenticity. The timing made it devastating. The email was dated February 12, 2011, just one day after the infamous photograph of Andrew walking through Central Park with Jeffrey Epstein resurfaced in global media. That image had shocked the world. Epstein had only recently completed his sentence for soliciting prostitution from a minor, and yet there was the Duke of York strolling beside him as if nothing had changed. Andrew's defense at the time, repeated in his disastrous 2019 BBC interview, was that he had visited Epstein specifically to end their friendship, that the meeting in New York was closure. a final conversation to sever ties. He claimed he had stopped all contact with Epstein after his 2010 release from prison. This email obliterated that defense. Written after the photographed meeting, it suggested not an ending, but a continuation. The casual tone, "Let's play some more soon," implied ongoing plans, future encounters, a relationship that had not been terminated, but merely interrupted. The digital investigation that followed was unprecedented for the Monarchy. Forensic analysts pored over email headers, IP addresses, and encrypted backups. Journalists raced to confirm the findings, seeking corroboration from tech experts and legal advisors. For the first time in history, the Crown faced a reckoning preserved not in handwritten letters or whispered conversations, but in digital code, permanent, traceable, and undeniable. Inside Buckingham Palace, panic spread through the ranks. Hurried meetings were convened. Communications teams went silent. Aides reportedly began scrubbing through other digital archives, fearful of what else might emerge. The contrast between the internal chaos and the external calm was striking. A storm hidden behind golden gates, thunder muffled by centuries of protocol. The cruelest irony was that William himself had ordered the transparency policy that uncovered the truth. His vision for a modern, accountable monarchy had inadvertently exposed his own family's darkest secret. There was a time when Prince Andrew was beloved, a genuine hero, a man whose military service defined him as something more than just another royal living off public funds. In the early 1980s, as a helicopter pilot during the Falklands War, he flew dangerous missions into combat zones, risking his life for his country. The British public adored him for it. Newspapers called him the handsome prince, his charm and bravery earning genuine respect. His marriage to Sarah Ferguson in 1986 only amplified his popularity. The Duke and Duchess of York became tabloid fixtures, glamorous, fun-loving, seemingly more relatable than other royals. They represented a younger, more accessible monarchy. Their wedding was watched by millions. Their daughters, Beatrice and Eugenie, photographed constantly, their lives dissected and celebrated in equal measure. But behind the public adoration, cracks were forming. Andrew's post-military career as a trade envoy brought him into contact with global elites, businessmen, financiers, power brokers from every corner of the world. The lavish dinners, private jets, and luxury accommodations began to define him more than his service ever had. He developed a reputation for arrogance, for tone-deaf spending, for friendships with morally questionable figures. The transition was gradual but unmistakable, from soldier to socialite, from public servant to self-serving aristocrat. Andrew seemed to believe his royal status granted him immunity from judgment, that his title placed him above scrutiny. He lived without limits, indulging in privileges that grew increasingly disconnected from the reality most Britons faced. Those who knew him from his military days watched with sadness as the man they once admired transformed into someone unrecognizable. The bravery remained, but it was now directed toward defending his lifestyle rather than serving his nation. In hindsight, the warning signs were clear. He had everything a man could want: title, wealth, freedom, but he lacked the one thing that might have saved him: limits. He had everything but limits, and that, history would prove, was his downfall. In the late 1990s, through his friendship with Ghislaine Maxwell, Prince Andrew was introduced to Jeffrey Epstein. At the time, Epstein was known primarily as a wealthy financier with connections to politicians, academics, and celebrities worldwide. His parties were legendary: exclusive gatherings in Manhattan penthouses, Caribbean islands, and European estates where the world's elite mingled freely. To Andrew, Epstein's world must have seemed intoxicating. Here was a man whose wealth translated into influence, whose network spanned continents, whose lifestyle embodied unchecked power. They became friends quickly, Andrew visiting Epstein's properties in New York, flying to his island retreat, attending events where business, pleasure, and politics blurred into one seamless experience. Journalists who observed Andrew during this period noted his fascination with Epstein's sphere of influence. The Duke seemed drawn not just to the wealth, but to the access it provided to presidents, to tech moguls, to anyone who mattered in the modern world. Then came 2006. Epstein was arrested in Palm Beach, Florida, on charges of soliciting prostitution from a minor. The details were horrifying, the evidence overwhelming. He eventually pleaded guilty to 2 prostitution charges and served just over a year in prison. For most people, this would have been the end of any association. Distance would be immediate, contact severed permanently. But in 2010, just months after Epstein's release, Andrew was photographed walking with him through Central Park. The image sent shockwaves through Britain. How could a member of the royal family, a man representing the crown, be seen publicly with a convicted sex offender? Andrew's defense was that the meeting was meant to end the friendship, a face-to-face conversation to close that chapter of his life. But the optics were disastrous. Editorials condemned his judgment. Protests erupted. Members of Parliament demanded explanations. The Duke's moral blindness seemed absolute. What he failed to understand was that his title did not grant him immunity from consequence. If anything, it magnified every misstep, every poor decision, every moment of questionable judgment. This relationship, built on privilege, sustained by arrogance, would become the most damaging association in modern royal history. He believed his title made him untouchable. It didn't. On November 16, 2019, Prince Andrew sat down for what he believed would be his vindication. The BBC Newsnight interview with Emily Maitlis was meant to clear his name, to explain his side of the story, to put to rest the mounting allegations surrounding his friendship with Jeffrey Epstein. Instead, it became the defining catastrophe of his public life. The setting was formal, cold lighting, a carefully arranged room, 2 chairs facing each other. Maitlis's tone was calm but probing, her questions direct. Andrew, nervous but attempting confidence, began his defense. Then came the moments that would be replayed endlessly, dissected by commentators, turned into memes and cultural shorthand for spectacular failure. He claimed he couldn't have been at a London nightclub on the night in question because he was at a Pizza Express in Woking with his daughter. The specificity of the alibi, remembered with perfect clarity after more than a decade, struck many as rehearsed, implausible. He insisted he had a medical condition that prevented him from sweating, contradicting a key detail in Virginia Giuffre's account. The claim seemed absurd, medically questionable, and desperately evasive. Most damningly, he defended his friendship with Epstein even after the conviction, describing him as someone with interesting connections, someone useful to know. The interview revealed not contrition, but justification, not remorse, but entitlement. Public reaction was swift and brutal. What began as stunned silence transformed into ridicule. Polls showed a catastrophic collapse in public trust. Royal commentators called it the end of public forgiveness, a moment when the protective bubble around royalty finally burst. Within days, Queen Elizabeth II, deeply pained but recognizing the severity, stripped Andrew of his royal duties. He would no longer represent the crown, no longer attend official functions, no longer receive public funding for his work. The interview was meant to defend him. Instead, it immortalized his guilt in the public consciousness, forever linking his name with poor judgment and moral failure. Fast forward to early 2025. The leaked email, authenticated and verified, reignited everything Andrew thought he had left behind. The press descended once again. Parliamentary debates erupted over royal transparency and accountability. Republican voices, long marginalized in Britain, grew louder, calling for fundamental reform of the monarchy itself. Inside the palace, the final confrontation unfolded. Prince William and King Charles faced each other in silence, both understanding what had to be done, but approaching it from different places. Charles, bound by the love of a brother, hesitated. William, bound by duty to an institution larger than family, pressed forward. The conversations were reportedly agonizing. Late-night meetings, raised voices, long silences. Charles wanted to protect Andrew, to find some middle path that preserved family unity. But William understood that half measures were no longer possible. The monarchy's survival demanded clarity, demanded sacrifice. Meanwhile, Andrew retreated into isolation. His Windsor estate became a fortress of silence. Photographers camped outside, his daughters Beatrice and Eugenie withdrawing from public life to protect their own families. Official documents began removing his royal crest, a symbolic erasure that mirrored his exile. William prepared his statement with meticulous care, understanding its historical weight. He was no longer just a son or a nephew making a family decision. He was the monarchy's conscience, the voice of its future, the man who would determine whether the crown could survive its own failures. He was no longer just a son or a nephew, he was the monarchy's conscience. The emotional toll rippled through the family like aftershocks from an earthquake. King Charles, already aged by the weight of sudden kingship, seemed to age overnight, his face more drawn, his public appearances tinged with sadness. Those close to him reported that he had barely slept in the weeks leading up to William's announcement, caught in an impossible position between the brother he had known for nearly 7 decades and the institution he had sworn to protect. The relationship between Charles and Andrew had always been complex. As children, they were separated by 12 years, enough of a gap that they had never been close confidants, yet not so distant that family bonds didn't matter. Charles remembered Andrew as the baby of the family, the son who brought joy to their aging parents, the helicopter pilot who made their mother beam with pride during the Falklands War. To exile that brother, to watch him become a pariah, felt like betraying not just Andrew, but their mother's memory. Yet Charles also understood the brutal mathematics of monarchy. One man's reputation could not be allowed to destroy an institution that had survived for over 1,000 years. The crown was bigger than any individual, bigger than family, bigger than personal loyalty. History would judge him not on whether he protected his brother, but on whether he protected the monarchy itself. Beatrice and Eugenie, caught between love for their father and recognition of his failures, retreated into privacy, their own futures clouded by association. They released no statements, made no public appearances, withdrew from social media entirely. Friends reported that both were devastated, not just by their father's actions, but by the public nature of his downfall, the way every failure was dissected in real time before millions of observers. The two princesses faced an impossible dilemma: how to support a father they loved while acknowledging the gravity of his mistakes. Their silence spoke volumes, neither defending him publicly nor condemning him, simply vanishing from view as the storm raged around them. Royal experts predicted it would be years, perhaps decades, before they could fully resume public roles without their father's shadow following them. Queen Camilla, ever pragmatic, reportedly supported William's decision fully, understanding that sentiment could not outweigh survival. During private meetings with Charles, she had been blunt. Protecting Andrew would destroy everything they had worked for. The public would never forgive it. The institution would collapse under the weight of its own hypocrisy. Sometimes, she argued, love meant letting go, even when it broke your heart. Princess Anne, long the family's voice of blunt realism, had been pushing for this outcome for years. She had never understood the coddling of Andrew, never accepted the excuses made on his behalf. To her, his behavior had violated the most fundamental rule of royal life: service above self. She reportedly told William privately, "You're doing the right thing. It should have been done years ago." Publicly, the reaction was relief mixed with mourning. Polls showed overwhelming support for William's decision, with citizens praising his courage and moral clarity. Editorial pages across the Commonwealth commended his willingness to place principle over family. Yet there was also sadness, recognition that for the monarchy to live, one of its own had to be erased. The formal statement removing Andrew's remaining privileges was comprehensive and final. His royal crest would no longer appear on official documents. His honorary military titles were returned to the crown. His ceremonial roles dissolved. His place in the line of succession maintained only as a constitutional formality with no practical meaning. It was symbolic death, a royal exiled without ever leaving the country, a prince stripped of everything that made him royal except the blood in his veins. In the days that followed, William was photographed alone in his office late at night, old footage of Queen Elizabeth II's coronation playing on a screen before him. The images were haunting. A young queen accepting an impossible burden, crowds cheering, the weight of history settling on her shoulders. Those who saw William watching understood. He was reflecting on what legacy truly costs, understanding that honor is not inherited but earned, and sometimes paid for in silence and sacrifice that no one else will ever fully understand. The cost had been calculated. The price had been paid. Now came the question, had it been worth it? The weeks following William's announcement brought a strange calm to the monarchy. The crisis that had threatened to consume it was contained. The wound cauterized even as it remained painful. Historians began analyzing the decision, comparing it to pivotal moments when institutions chose evolution over tradition, when survival demanded transformation. Some argued William's decision saved the crown, proving it could hold itself accountable, that it valued principle over privilege. Others worried he had wounded something fundamental, that family loyalty was the bedrock upon which monarchy rested, and without it, the institution itself became hollow. William himself returned to public duties within days, shaking hands, smiling for cameras, performing the endless ceremonial functions that define royal life. But those close to him noticed the change, a quiet heaviness in his eyes, an awareness that leadership sometimes means carrying burdens no one else can see. The monarchy had survived, but it bore scars. The question now was whether those scars represented healing or permanent damage, whether this moment would be remembered as the crown's necessary purge or its fatal compromise. One thing was certain, the old rules no longer applied. Transparency had replaced discretion. Accountability had superseded loyalty. The institution that had survived centuries by protecting its own had chosen, perhaps for the first time, to protect its principles instead. Even the oldest institutions must face their reflection. In that reflection lies their redemption or their ruin. As William prepared for his eventual reign, he carried with him the knowledge that monarchy in the modern age demanded something his ancestors never faced: the willingness to sacrifice everything, even family, for the integrity of the crown itself. The heartbreaking news was confirmed. The consequences would echo for generations. What do you think? Did William's decision save the monarchy or wound it beyond repair? And stay tuned for the next chapter in this unprecedented royal saga.